Graham Norton has spent over 2 decades making the impossible look effortless. Week after week, he fills that famous red sofa with the biggest names on the planet, A-list actors, music legends, Oscar winners, and somehow makes every single one of them feel like they just sat down with an old friend. He laughs at the right moment. He pushes at exactly the right angle. He holds the room together with a warmth and timing that most hosts can only dream of. By any measure, he is the greatest television interviewer of his generation. But here's what nobody talks about: even the greatest can be broken. There are names that make Graham Norton go quiet. Names that, when brought up in interviews or at literary festivals or on his own podcast, draw out a slow exhale and a look that says far more than words. He's rarely bitter about it. He's rarely cruel. But at 62, after a career spanning thousands of guests and hundreds of hours of live television, he has finally started telling the truth about the nights that nearly finished him. These are the 6 guests Graham Norton couldn't stand, told through his own words, and the moments that confirmed everything. There are bad guests, and then there is the night Mark Wahlberg fell asleep on Graham Norton's couch in front of a live studio audience. It was 2013, and the sofa was stacked with talent: Michael Fassbender, Sarah Silverman, and Wahlberg himself, there to promote Broken City. By all accounts, the Hollywood star arrived pleasant enough, chatted with producers, gave Norton a few anecdotes about the film. There was no warning sign. Not a single one. Then, about 15 minutes in, whatever was in Wahlberg's system took hold, and the evening collapsed entirely. Norton finally told the complete story at the Henley Literary Festival in October 2025. If you ever see a drunk person on the show, he told the audience, it's because they've arrived drunk. We have not made that happen. He paused before continuing. Mark Wahlberg was a weird one because when he arrived, he didn't seem drunk. He told me about his film, told me a couple of stories about stunts going wrong or whatever, and then it was only 15 minutes into the show when whatever the hell was in his system really took hold, and it was hell. Hell is the exact right word. Wahlberg began derailing every conversation, talking over Silverman, cutting off Fassbender mid-sentence, making jokes that landed nowhere. Norton held his smile for the cameras. Then came the moment that made the audience genuinely gasp. Wahlberg climbed onto his host's lap. And then, in perhaps the most surreal television moment of that entire decade, he fell asleep. On camera. In front of hundreds of people. Norton told the Mirror, at one point Mark was asleep on the couch in front of the audience. Fassbender, Norton recalled, had finally been getting through a great story. Norton thought it was going well. He glanced over at Wahlberg. He was out cold. When asked about it afterwards, Wahlberg shrugged it off: jet lag, whiskey, too much fun. Norton, as always, accepted the apology graciously. But when people ask him today who his worst guest was, his answer comes without hesitation: Mark Wahlberg. He's said so in print, on stage, and in conversation. Once, he says, was more than enough. Some guests arrive nervous. Some arrive overconfident. Mickey Rourke arrived with a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels and absolutely no interest in being there. Norton has described the experience to the New Zealand Herald with a weariness that says everything. Mickey Rourke, he was just exhausting because he wanted to smoke all the time. I'd turn away for a second, turn back, and he'd have lit another cigarette. It was so boring. You feel like a teacher taking children on a school trip, not a chat show host. That image alone, Graham Norton, one of the sharpest wits in British television, reduced to a nervous teacher chaperoning an unruly pupil, tells you how bad it was. Rourke gave mumbled, clipped answers when he gave answers at all. He stared past cameras. He fiddled with his lighter while other guests were speaking. The rhythm that Norton worked so hard to build, that sense of momentum and shared laughter, died completely the moment Rourke sat down. Behind the scenes, producers recalled Rourke arriving late and visibly irritated. The broadcast had to be edited heavily to rescue whatever flow remained. But viewers noticed the dead air. They noticed the strange, heavy atmosphere that Norton's usual charm couldn't shift. Rourke, for his part, has never apologized. He's never seemed bothered. His whole public persona is built on a refusal to play the entertainment game on anyone else's terms, and that is, in some ways, admirable. But it made him one of the most genuinely painful hours of Norton's professional life. The word Norton returns to, every time he mentions it, is exhausting. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just training, in the way that only someone who simply doesn't care can be. If Wahlberg was chaos and Rourke was indifference, Kevin Costner was something rarer and, for a host like Norton, arguably worse, total, impenetrable stonewalling directed specifically at him. Norton has told this story more than once, and the detail that stings is always the same. He asks Costner a question, a perfectly reasonable, well-researched question, and Costner looks back at him as if to say, "Do I really have to deal with this man?" He gives a half answer, flat and closed. Then Helen Mirren, who was seated on the same sofa that evening, turns to Costner and asks him something. And suddenly Costner lights up. He's engaged, warm, animated. It wasn't that Costner couldn't do the interview. It was that he chose not to do it with Norton. Norton has spoken about this contrast with a kind of rueful amusement, as if he still can't quite believe it happened. He told the Express, "I ask him a question, and he looks at me like, 'Jesus, do I have to talk to this man?'" He kind of gives a half answer, and Helen Mirren chips in and asks him a question, and he could not be happier. Costner has hinted at his ambivalence toward the talk show format in general, suggesting that the expectations to perform and be charming on cue don't suit him. Norton understands that intellectually. But understanding something doesn't make sitting through it any easier. Every joke Norton floated died quietly in the space between them. The audience, who had been buzzing before the segment began, started to slip away. Norton never invited Costner back. And when asked what the experience was like, his answer is precise and almost gentle. "Kevin Costner, lovely man, I'm sure. Just not my kind of evening." Robert De Niro is, by almost any reckoning, one of the greatest actors who has ever lived. Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, The Godfather Part 2. A career of almost unfathomable depth. And when Norton had him on the show, he expected fireworks, good stories, big personality, the kind of energy that only a genuine legend can bring. What he got was silence. Norton spoke about it at the Cheltenham Literature Festival in 2018, and his verdict was precise: he's not a storyteller, or very verbal. He's a benign presence. The word benign does a lot of work there. It's the kind of word you use when you're trying to be diplomatic while also being honest. De Niro wasn't rude. He wasn't difficult in any obvious way. He simply gave the show nothing to work with. The moment that Norton keeps returning to captures it perfectly. De Niro began telling a story. The whole sofa leaned in. The audience leaned in. Everyone could feel that this was going somewhere. This was going to be the great De Niro anecdote that would justify everything. Then, after a long build-up, De Niro stopped, looked around, and said, "Why am I telling this?" Nobody had an answer. Norton had the segment cut. De Niro has appeared on the show multiple times over the years. He's returned since the Cheltenham comments, and Norton has remained professional each time. The two men simply operate on different frequencies. De Niro spent his entire career expressing everything through characters, through roles, through the controlled intensity of performance. Asked to be himself in front of a studio audience, with a host lobbing cheerful questions and an expectation of laughter and warmth, he retreats. What the audience gets is contemplation where they expected charisma. Norton respects the man enormously. But as he's put it, not everyone made for the movies is made for the couch. Daryl Hannah's appearance on the Graham Norton Show remains, by his own account, one of the most excruciating experiences he has had in a career full of live television. What made it different from the other difficult interviews is this: Hannah wasn't drunk, wasn't combative, wasn't bored in any obvious sense. She was simply absent. Physically present, but completely unreachable. Norton has been open about the fact that Hannah suffers from severe anxiety around studio audiences, a genuine, documented condition that has affected her throughout her career. He's mentioned that she apparently walked out and fainted at a David Letterman appearance, so intense is her fear of live crowds. He understood this intellectually. But understanding a thing and surviving it on live television are two very different experiences. From the moment she sat down, Hannah gave one-word answers and stared somewhere past the cameras. Norton tried everything: gentle questions, funny questions, self-deprecating tangents, anything to create an opening. Nothing worked. As he has described it, I'd ask something, anything, and she'd just stare or say yeah and stop. It felt like she'd been dragged there against her will. He went further in a later live Q&A, admitting, "You start thinking, is it me? Did I say something wrong? But no, it was just nothing. She gave you nothing." Production staff recall Hannah arriving tense and withdrawn, barely speaking before filming began. One crew member described it to reporters as interviewing a ghost. Norton, ever the consummate professional, kept the show alive through sheer will, filling silences with anecdotes, turning the conversation to other guests, smiling through the paralysis. But the audience could feel it. The air in the room had gone flat. Hannah has suggested in subsequent interviews that she finds the performative nature of talk shows deeply uncomfortable, that being asked to be funny and charming on command is simply not who she is. For her, the awkwardness wasn't defiance. It was honesty. Norton doesn't dispute that. But he's joked more than once that the Daryl Hannah interview aged him by at least a decade. When her name comes up, his expression says everything before he does. Every name on this list has been difficult in their own way, chaotic, distant, exhausting, unreachable. But none of them cast a shadow that grew longer after they left the building. Harvey Weinstein's appearance on The Graham Norton Show was disturbing in retrospect in a way that no other difficult guest has been. He didn't arrive drunk or silent or indifferent. He arrived as a man who owned the room, and he behaved accordingly, dominating conversations, redirecting topics toward himself, bulldozing through the easy rhythm of the show with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. At the time, Norton processed it the way anyone might, a powerful producer with an oversized ego. Annoying, but not unusual in the entertainment industry. It was only later, after 2017, after the flood of allegations and eventual criminal convictions, that what had felt merely unpleasant took on a far more chilling meaning. Norton spoke publicly about it at a live event in Dublin in 2022, and his words were measured and honest. "I often talk around who my least favorite guest was, but someone reminded me, I have a really good answer to this now. It's Harvey Weinstein. He's in jail, so he gets the prize for the worst guest ever." But the detail that haunts him most is this: Weinstein hadn't even been invited. He had emailed Norton's team directly, insisting on being booked for a show that was already fully scheduled. The emails went back and forth, Weinstein pushing each time a polite refusal was sent. Norton eventually turned it over to his producers, mystified by the persistence. At the time, he thought, that tunnel vision, that refusal to accept no, that's what makes someone a great producer. It wasn't until later that he understood it differently. "That is what makes him a predator," Norton said. "It was that kind of weird, tunnel vision thing. And it was sort of chilling in retrospect, because I was just laughing at those emails. But you realize, oh my God, that is an insight into how that man is." In 2024, after Weinstein's original conviction was overturned and a retrial was ordered, Norton was asked again about the experience. His answer hadn't changed: "Worst guest ever," he said. "No competition. 6 guests, 6 very different kinds of difficult. What connects them is not rudeness, exactly, or even ego. What connects them is the moment when Norton's extraordinary skill, his ability to make anyone feel at ease, to find the funny angle on anything, to hold a live audience in the palm of his hand, was simply not enough. Those moments are rare. That's what makes them memorable. For a man who has made a career out of warmth and wit, the names on this list represent the limits of what even the very best can do. Graham Norton has never been mean about them in public. He hasn't burned bridges or settled scores. But at 62, with a career like his behind him, he's allowed to tell the truth. And the truth, it turns out, is far more interesting than the smile he wore through all of it. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more stories from behind the scenes of television's most iconic moments. We'll see you in the next one.